Welcome to the Ubuntu Server Series. Today we're going to talk about Ubuntu's unique underbelly. What is it that makes Ubuntu special, unique, and different from other Linux server distributions? Well, a bunch of stuff. So we're going to go to a new slide and talk about it. First, I want to give you a little bit of a history lesson. Now don't worry, it's only a half slide version. It's only half slide history. This isn't a history class. I just want to talk a little bit so you know about the history. So Ubuntu, which is pronounced Ubuntu, it's actually an African word, and it's a very difficult word to describe in English. Basically, it means human or humanness or to be human. It's a Linux distribution made for people, and it's Debian based. So anyway, that's Ubuntu. If you want to know how to pronounce it, Ubuntu. That's the way. You can say Ubuntu and everybody will know what you're talking about, but Ubuntu is official. Debian based. Basically, this means that when they made Ubuntu, they started with a Debian and then modified it, added to it, changed some things. Here's the important thing. A lot of people say that Ubuntu just stole Debian, repackaged it, and now they get all the glory. Well, that's not entirely true. Ubuntu gives back to the Debian community more than any other company or any other developer, right? Ubuntu does things and then submits it to Debian so that the underlying Debian system benefits from all of those things. Now, not everything goes back into Debian because the Debian folks don't want everything that Ubuntu does, but nonetheless. Ubuntu comes in a server version or a server... I guess version is the right word, and also desktop. No, it started initially as a desktop-only distribution. It would put a GUI interface on there, and it was designed to be Linux for the masses, Linux for humans, remember? Linux that everybody could use. And as it turned out, the system was so slick and worked so well that ideally, or that people thought, you know what, this would make a really great server as well as desktop. And so they started rolling out both. The server has no GUI interface, it's just text, and it also has a slightly different kernel that works better for server environments, especially real-time stuff. All right, so started out as a desktop. Now this is not preparing you for any sort of certification exam. This is just for your general knowledge. Version numbering, this is important because the version numbering is bizarre. It's a little bit strange, okay? Basically, and we're going to see in the next slide or in the next couple slides, a whole bunch of different versions and talking about them. But basically, it goes year dot month. Now, if that doesn't make sense, right now, as of today, the current version of Ubuntu is 13.04. This means it was released in 2013, and what month? April. So April 2013, you can tell when the version was released based on the version number. It's kind of cool. Now the version naming, this is generally an adjective and an animal, and they both have the same first letter. So for example, version 13.04 is raring ringtail. And what good does that do? Nothing other than it has a really cool name along with the cool numbering scheme. All right, I'm going to get this out of the way so it doesn't get in our name, but raring ringtail is the current version. And that's your half slide history lesson on Ubuntu. The other thing I want to show you on this slide with all this cool little graphics is basically the world of Ubuntu and its variants and etc, etc. So from the beginning, everything comes from Debian. Debian is a Linux distribution that's been around for a long time. From there, Ubuntu was formed. It took Debian and it made it more user-friendly, easy to install things, easier to install the OS on computers in general, had hardware detection improvements, etc, etc. Ubuntu is still the official operating system, but they have a bunch of official variants. So in the Ubuntu family, we have all of these different, plus a few others, but these are the main ones. We have Lubuntu, which is the LDXC environment. We have Xubuntu, which uses XFCE as its desktop manager. We have Kubuntu, which uses KDE. Edubuntu, which is designed to work in an educational environment, and Ubuntu Studio, which is designed for creating like video and pictures, etc, etc. These are official Ubuntu variants. There's like probably a bunch of non-official ones. One of those non-official ones is Linux Mint, which you may have heard of, and this is where it starts to get complex. Linux Mint takes Ubuntu and adds some other things to it to make it even more user-friendly. But then Linux Mint also has a version that directly comes from Debian. So depending on the version of Linux Mint, it's either based on Debian or based on Ubuntu. Crunchbang Linux originally started as an Ubuntu derivative, but then they decided to abandon that and go directly from Debian. So how's that for confusing, right? These are the official ones. This is non-official but uses Ubuntu. There's a bunch of other ones that people roll. Actually, Lubuntu, a little bit of trivia, half-slide trivia. Lubuntu started out as a non-official Ubuntu derivative, and then Ubuntu, the folks at Ubuntu, Canonical is the name of the company behind Ubuntu, they decided, you know what, Lubuntu serves a purpose, so we're going to adopt that into our family. So now it's official. If you want an extremely silly look at the different versions of Ubuntu and their family, this is completely extracurricular, but a couple years past, I made a video about the Ubuntu family. So I apologize in advance if you go to snarko/Ubuntu. Yeah, I can only say I apologize. And let's abandon this slide and move on. This probably could have gone in our last slide. However, I just wanted to talk about a couple more things about Ubuntu that makes it specific. Here's its guts, if you will. It uses the deb package management system, or you may think of this as the apt or apt-get system. This is how it manages its official packages and even its unofficial packages. This is the system that you use for installing daemons or tools or libraries, etc. into the system if you're not going to do the whole download, source, and compile, which most people don't do in production servers, to be quite honest. Usually you want to use the prepackaged daemons that you can get officially from Ubuntu. It does not have a root password by default. This doesn't mean that you don't know the password, which you don't. It means that by design there is no root password. If you install a system like CentOS based on that other popular RPM based distribution, you'll notice that you actually do install a root password, and you'll need that to do some work as root. However, in Ubuntu, there is no root password. It's only by using sudo that you gain access to root abilities. So sudo is the way that you get root power, if you will, in Ubuntu. And that's different than things like CentOS. Now, if you are a CentOS person and that seems a little foreign to you, one other thing you need to know is that very often in RPM-based distributions, there are configuration files in the etc sysconfig folder, and this is kind of a catch-all repository for where you put a bunch of different configurations. That is not there in Ubuntu. In Ubuntu, there's something similar, but it's in the etc default folder. Now, this isn't all of the configuration files. The entire etc directory, if you're a Linux person, you know that the etc or etc directory contains lots of configuration files for lots of programs, but for some reason they lump a whole bunch of things into one folder. In RPM based, it's often etc sysconfig. Here it's going to be etc default. So that's where you're going to want to look for some rudimentary default settings for a lot of the things installed on our system. Okay, here's a little better or a little more exciting slide. And this is where we want to talk about versions. Now, you'll remember I talked about version 13.04 as raring ringtail. Well, versions in Ubuntu get a little complex. So there are 2 releases per year, and here are the versions that have gone back all the way to 2008. Actually, the original one I think was in 2005, but I ran out of slide, and you could have figured out the pattern from here, right? Basically, the releases almost always happen in April and October. Now, there was one time back in 2006 where that didn't happen, but generally it's always in April and October, April and October, April and October, where a release is released. And the version number, you understand now where this comes from. We talked about that just a couple slides ago. And the important thing to know is the support. Okay, how long are these things supported? Should I keep using 9.10? Should I upgrade to this? Where should I be? I mean, every 6 months is often for a new version to come out. Should I upgrade? Should I not upgrade? Etc. So the most important thing, since this series is about Ubuntu server, I want to talk about non-LTS versus LTS. Now, LTS stands for long-term support. If it's a non-LTS version, it's supported for 9 months, and then there's no longer support for it. And this is true of all versions, whether it's Ubuntu Desktop or Ubuntu Server. And now, if it's not LTS, it's supported for 9 months. If it is LTS, if its release is deemed a long-term support version, then it's supported for 5 full years, no matter if it's Ubuntu Desktop or Ubuntu Server. Now, the reason that this is important to know now is that it wasn't that way before. This is a recent change to the support system in Ubuntu. It used to be that older versions, they had a more complex time frame. If it was non-LTS, it was supported for 18 months. If it was LTS, if it was a long-term support version, then the desktop version of that particular number was supported for 3 years, but the server version of that version was supported for 5 years. It was really complicated and kind of hard to keep track of. I like that they've simplified the support model. If it's not LTS, no matter if it's desktop or server, it's supported for 9 months. If it is LTS, it's supported for 5 years. All versions, desktop, server, etc. Now, how do you know if it's LTS or non-LTS? Well, the documentation will be pretty clear when you're downloading it. As it happens, they usually come out every 2 years. So 804 is LTS, 1004 is LTS, 1204 is LTS, and it's never promised until the time is coming close for release, but we can be fairly certain that 1404 will probably be a long-term support release. So that means right now on a server, you don't want to have a brand new version every 6 months. It's a real pain, and often these intermediary versions, not only are they only supported for 9 months, but the packages tend to be a little less stable, right? They're kind of intermediary between the LTS. If you're going to install a server, I highly recommend to use an LTS version. So for right now, even though it's 2013, you're going to use 1204 as your server platform. And that means that, yeah, sure, there may be a new LTS released in 2014. However, this is going to be supported until when? Until 2017. So you don't have to worry if you install 1204, yeah, but in another year a new one's coming out. That's okay. You have full support available until 2017 with 1204. So that is how the versioning works with Ubuntu. Also 13.10, it's kind of cool. It's Saucy Salamander. I just thought that was a really cool name, so I wanted to put a picture of him up. But that is versioning. Again, the important thing that you should pull from this slide is to use LTS in a server environment. Okay? There's one exception that we might talk about, and that's with Edge Ubuntu. But even that, if it's going to be a production server, gosh, it's just hard not to pick LTS, okay? Because it's supported for a long time, it tends to be more stable, and it's awesome. So I highly recommend LTS. We're going to be focusing on 1204 in this entire series. I'm going to be using 1204 as the Ubuntu server version, okay? So all this talk about desktop versus server, you're probably thinking, wait a minute, does that mean that this entire series is going to just be looking at a command line, like green text on a black background? Well, yes and no. Okay, for a couple reasons. One, a full screen CLI interface or command line interface is ugly. And I don't want to stare at that for 20 nuggets, and you don't want to stare at that for 20 nuggets. Okay, it's almost as ugly as my handwriting. So what we're going to do, we finally now in this nugget get to go to a computer. What we're going to do is I'm generally going to SSH into the server. So this is going to be our setup. Here is our Ubuntu server. You'll notice it's 1204. This .2 means that there has been update releases. This will keep enumerating as the updates go, but this doesn't mean that it's a new version. It's just let you know that you have an LTS version of the server, and this is the version that we're going to be using. This is ugly. I mean, this is really, really ugly and kind of difficult to emulate in a virtual machine to get this exact resolution. So what we're going to do is we're going to be using a full Linux desktop, and we're going to be SSHing into the server. Now, I want to differentiate between the local machine, which is actually, this is Xubuntu, if you were curious. This is what Xubuntu 1304, the version 1304 looks like. Again, this is a desktop install, so I'm not concerned about using LTS. But I don't want to confuse between the local terminal and a server terminal. So what I'm going to do, if it's the local terminal we're looking at, it's just going to be this regular terminal box that you see right here. However, I've installed another terminal program so that if we want to go to the server terminal, it's going to look different, okay? I figured green text on a black background was going to be the way. This is us logged into that same server that we just saw. So this same login over SSH, we're logged into that server in this window. A lot nicer to look at, and we can actually like have a browser and point to it and stuff while we do our Nugget series. Okay, so this is how we're going to interact with the server for the most part. I may go to that full screen thing for a couple reasons, like during the install. However, this is how we're going to be interacting with it, and you'll be able to tell the difference because the local terminal on our just Ubuntu box, our Xubuntu box, is just going to be this default terminal. This one with the green text in the black background and saying Ubuntu server remote connection across the top, this is going to be our server that we're connecting to. Hopefully that makes sense. I just don't want to cause confusion, and I certainly don't want to use that big ugly screen for all of our series. Okay, let's go back, make sure that everything makes sense, and we'll move on to our next nugget. Okay, back here at our most important slide, or arguably the most important slide, we talk about how the versions work in LTS versus non-LTS. I think everything's covered. I want to make sure that this makes sense, and once you know what we're going to do, the next nugget, we'll start doing it. We'll start by installing Ubuntu and seeing how that process works. I hope that this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.